right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and I just want to say real quick, thank you guys so very much for um, just being awesome, folks. I always like to say that before I get into the story, just to let you guys know I really truly appreciate you. Me and my family do, as a matter of fact. We really truly appreciate you guys being here and sitting through the advertising, because that's really, how this all gets paid for. So there you go with that. Real quick, I want to give a word out there to Adele. I am really trying to get that coffee mug out to you, but for some reason they keep like denying some sort of address thing. So I'm gonna fix that problem and get you your coffee mug. I don't know what that issue is, but there you have it, and there you are. And real quick, I think next week, right before the PacWest Bigfoot encounter story, I am going to have that awesome page up on the website on PacWestBigfoot.com that is literally going to be packed full of quite a few summer reading books. I think you should grab that have everything to do with Bigfoot. Most of it is nonfiction, but there is a fiction or two book in there that would be just for some good fun reading this summer, lakeside or while you're waiting for that old fish to grab that line. So there you go, around the campfire. How's that sound? With that, let's get a sip of the old Sasquatch coffee. All right, and we are ready to go this week. And I have to tell you guys real quick, I know one of these boys. Two teenage boys taunted by Bigfoot in southern Oregon. I was 13 at the time. My friend and I were, I believe, taunted by a Bigfoot in southern Oregon. Here is what happened on both occasions and why I think these things are nothing but trouble. This was last year, by the way, both incidents, and they happened out of my friend's grandparents' home. They literally live outside of the small town I still live in, about 7 miles out and up a mountain, one of the foothills. So here is what happened and what we saw. Taunted by Bigfoot. Like I said, this all happened last summer, sometime in the middle of June, then again in August, the beginning of it, I remember, if I remember. Both incidents were rather scary, and one of them, we actually saw this thing. Well, we got a decent look enough to tell it was a Bigfoot. My dad and mom are believers, but my friend's parents, and grandparents, well, I don't think they believe and told us we probably saw a bear. But I do not know any type of bear that looks like that. I never saw a bear with arms, legs, a head, and walks or runs, not to mention the fact they do not scream. It really was a pretty scary moment, both of them. Personally, I believed, as I said, in the existence of Bigfoot, but I never expected to have an encounter and not mere 7 miles out of town with one. This happened just outside my little town, like I said, in southern Oregon. I do not want to mention exactly where, but it happened on the property. It was located pretty far out of town, up the foothills below a small range of mountains where we live. My friend's grandpa and grandma were busy building a brand new home on the property. They lived there for decades already, and his grandpa had, and still have, a small mill there where he makes homemade furniture. We were in the mill at the time of the first encounter. Now, there was a sort of visual, I guess, but it was not until the second encounter that we would get a better visual and my suspicions would be confirmed. Oh, and before that, I did notice a couple things earlier that year when I was up there watching the Super Bowl with everyone. I was outside for a few and heard a scream like a person except louder and crazy sounding. It was pretty chilling. And when I told my buddy, he'd mentioned that he'd heard that same sound before, right around Christmas the month before. He too said it sounded rather crazy, like a high pitched woman screaming with almost a laughter like sound at the end as it trailed off. But here's exactly what happened: a grunt, a scream, and running. It was June, around the middle of the month, and I remember that soccer had just ended about a week or two earlier, and I was going to go swimming at my best friend's grandparents' pool. They have a pool on the property. We were going to have dinner there that evening as well, barbecue. It was just about the end of the day, literally just about the end of dusk when we both heard that crazy scream again off in the distance. I looked over at my buddy and he looked back at me with eyes wide open and a worried look on his face. Yeah, it was that same scream that sounded like a crazy person running and screaming off in the distance. But as soon as it came, it was gone, just like that. Gone. It was creepy, to say the least, and we both ran in telling his grandma what we'd heard. She said it was most likely coyote, as there were plenty around. Personally, I was not sold on that explanation, and neither was my friend. We ate dinner and decided to ask my parents if I could spend the night so we could stay up and watch a movie or play some video games. It was the weekend anyway. It was late, around midnight or so, and we were already in bed. Yeah, we did not last that long. But I was laying there in the living room when I noticed something that freaked me out. There was a new house, like I said, being built not 30 feet out the front door, but out the back door was a street light, one of two on the property. Not very bright, but a street light nonetheless. This was opposite the new house being built. The only thing out past the backyard was a fence and, well, a small mountain range it all led to. Like I said, the property was up a small mountain near the foothills and about 7 miles out of our town. It was as if something huge stepped out in front of the light. I was awake just moments before I noticed it. It was a tall shadow, but I could not make out its shape. Only the shadow of black that seemed to cross in front of the light, and it stopped right there. However, it was tall. The top of whatever it did block out the light and made the living room even darker than it was seconds before. It was really still for a few seconds or so as well until I heard a grunt, a pretty deep one too. I was about to wake my friend, but all of a sudden, this shadow ran off. Literally, I could hear through the slightly opened front window something heavy run off in the middle of the night. I got up and looked out the window, but saw nothing. I quickly shut it and woke my friend up and told him what happened. He was kind of freaked out about it, but whatever it was gone, so we both settled down into a video game for about a half hour before heading back to sleep. It would be a whole month before I would see something scary. A real monster that my dad has told me about. A monster called Bigfoot. August Rush. So, almost 2 months later, towards the end of August, just before homeschool was to start up again, I was going to spend an evening over with my friend at his grandparents' again. We hit the pool for a couple hours, played some football, catch at least, and had some fun out in the mill where there was a huge playroom upstairs built in. We ate some barbecue and headed back to the mill to swing on the rope up in the play area just before dark. We must have been up there for a while because by the time we looked out the window, it was dark. Really, really dark. His grandpa came out and asked if we wanted to head back home, but we asked if we could spend the night. We used his phone in the shop, or mill, basically, and called our parents, and all was good. We decided to see if we could come back to the house in an hour. Being summer, 10 p.m. is not all that late, as you know, especially when you're young. We decided to head downstairs, check out some cool stuff that my friend was building with his grandpa. It was dark outside by then, and we were getting tired. It was time for some video games and the living room floor with snacks. It was just as we turned to leave when we heard a loud smack on the wall outside on the backside of the mill. My buddy looked at me, and I was thinking about the night of the shadow all of a sudden and some large thing running off into the woods all of a sudden. We were not, however, completely freaked out at that point. Not yet, at least. My friend and I thought perhaps it was his grandpa messing with us, although that was something you'd not really expect from him. It was not unheard of, though. He was really a great guy and funny. I wished it had been, though, because what I saw that night has me both scared and in awe of what is out here in the woods of Oregon. But it was pretty loud. It was a pretty loud slap on the back of that wall, and I was not sure it was his grandpa with such a hard hit. That would have hurt real bad, I thought, if it had been him. I told my friend my thoughts, and he wanted to immediately bolt, and well, so did I. We started to take off for the front exit when we heard another loud slap. This time, however, it came from the direction we were running in. Whomever it was now between us and the house. Not a split second after that, I noticed movement as the street light across the driveway became blacked out for a split second as something or someone passed by it and fast. My friend noticed it too, and now he and I were both completely freaked out. Taunted by Bigfoot. It would take only a minute or so before we knew what was taunting us, a Bigfoot. We looked towards the back door at that point, but it only led out to another large driveway and shed on the opposite side, then all woods down the mountain. I did not want to go out the back door. It would take too long to get around to the house, and there was almost no light back there. We looked at each other, and for a second there, I saw some pretty serious fear in my buddy's eyes, and I'm sure he was seeing the same in me. At that moment, I looked back towards the back door. As another minute passed by without a sound, I started thinking it was time to move. It was time to get to the main house. We looked at each other and chatted about how we were going to make our move, and I suggested we walk like normal, just in case whatever it was might be set off by the noise and actions of two teenagers running like crazy people across the driveway. He agreed with me. But we waited another minute before I went first out the door. I looked around and saw nothing, no movement, nothing. All was quiet. Just the lights in the window of the old house across the way. We both finally stepped out and started walking along the driveway. It was about 30 or 40 yards away from the new house. Then we'd get to the old house where his grandparents lived currently while the other was being built. Like I said, it was really quiet, and the only sound I could hear was the both of us walking. But even that was broken up by a grunt of sorts from in front of us, and just to the west, near the woods. I also swear I heard a snort, but I cannot be too sure about that. Either way, however, something was not quite blocking us off from our straight path to the old house, but it was nearby and in between us and the new house, still. We then heard another grunt. At least that is what we believe it sounded like. It came from behind us all of a sudden. That was our sign, I believe, to start moving faster and get to the house. A big, hairy, scary monster. We finally made it to the front porch about 10 to 15 seconds after that last grunt. I don't know why, but I suggested to my buddy that we just stand there and see if we could see anything. Something in my gut was telling me that the stories my dad told me about Bigfoot may be true, and this might be one. After those grunts and slapping on the wall and what I'd seen that night pass between the old house and the streetlight, well, Bigfoot was the only answer, really. And it was. We stood there looking out towards the mill when I first saw it. The shadow I'd seen that night was more than a shadow, it was a big, scary, and hairy monster, it seemed. I could not make out the face, other than there was no real neck. It was just a big, huge silhouette. But you could tell as it swayed back and forth that it seemed to be full of hair, just completely hairy, and the arms were massively long, and his chest was broad. I swear the chest was as wide as my buddy was tall. It was tall. I could see as it stood about 10 feet or so from the mill, just outside the reach of the street light, that it was literally about a foot or two taller than the doorway. That had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe 9. My friend and I started getting really freaked out, scared actually, by then. This this Bigfoot just stood there staring in our direction. Just knowing today that this thing was out there while we were playing around seriously creeps me out. It moved after about 15 or seconds or so and of this stare down. Its massive strides took it into the dark and out of sight in the blink of our eyes. But that is what we saw and experienced, and I'll never make fun or doubt my dad about anything again, especially Bigfoot. Period. Still going up there? We ended up running inside and telling his grandparents about it. But even though his grandpa went out and took a look, he gave it up to a bear trying to get to his honey that he jars and sells locally on the side. He had recently had to kill one bear as it started getting a bit aggressive. But that was no bear. Bears do not walk off or stand there and sway back and forth. They do not have arms or legs like that either. I do recall this thing being slightly hunched over. Not too much, but enough to be noticeable. As I also said, I could not make out the face, but the head did have a funny cone shape to it. But that is all I can remember. My biggest memory is fear. I still go up there even now to hang out, however, but spending the night is kind of out of the question for now. Maybe when I get older and know where the guns are stashed, I suppose I would. I believe in Bigfoot. I've seen one, and they really are massive and scary. Just ask my friend and me. Thanks, Jordan.